Wicked poor man. Chapter 1. Marius, while seeking a girl in a bonnet, encounters a man in a cap. Summer passed, then the autumn. Winter came. Neither M. Leblanc nor the young girl had again set foot in the Luxembourg garden. Thenceforth, Marius had but one thought, to gaze once more on that sweet and adorable face. He sought constantly, he sought everywhere. He found nothing. He was no longer Marius, the enthusiastic dreamer, the firm, resolute, ardent man, the bold defier of fate, the brain which erected future on future, the young spirit encumbered with plans, with projects, with pride, with ideas and wishes. He was a lost dog. He fell into a black melancholy. All was over. Work disgusted him, walking tired him. Vast nature, formerly so filled with forms, lights, voices, counsels, perspectives, horizons, teachings, now lay empty before him. It seemed to him that everything had disappeared. He thought incessantly, for he could not do otherwise. But he no longer took pleasure in his thoughts. To everything that they proposed to him in a whisper, he replied in his darkness. What is the use? He heaped 100 reproaches on himself. Why did I follow her? I was so happy at the mere sight of her. She looked at me. Was not that immense? She had the air of loving me. Was not that everything? I wished to have, what? There was nothing after that. I have been absurd. It is my own fault, etc. etc. Courfeyrac. To whom he confided nothing, it was his nature, but who made some little guess at everything, that was his nature, had begun by congratulating him on being in love, though he was amazed at it. Then, seeing Marius fall into this melancholy state, he ended by saying to him, I see that you have been simply an animal. Here, come to the chaumiere. Once, having confidence in a fine September sun, Marius had allowed himself to be taken to the ball at Siaz by Courfeyrac, Bossuet and Grantaire, hoping, what a dream! That he might, perhaps, find her there. Of course he did not see the one he sought. But this is the place, all the same, where all lost women are found, grumbled Grantaire in an aside. Marius left his friends at the ball and returned home on foot. Alone. Through the night. Weary. Feverish. With sad and troubled eyes. Stunned by the noise and dust of the merry wagons filled with singing creatures on their way home from the feast. Which passed close to him, as he, in his discouragement, breathed in the acrid scent of the walnut trees, along the road, in order to refresh his head. He took to living more and more alone. Utterly overwhelmed, wholly given up to his inward anguish, going and coming in his pain like the wolf in the trap, seeking the absent one everywhere, stupefied by love. On another occasion, he had an encounter which produced on him a singular effect. He met, in the narrow streets in the vicinity of the boulevard des Invalides, a man dressed like a working man and wearing a cap with a long visor, which allowed a glimpse of locks of very white hair. Marius was struck with the beauty of this white hair, and scrutinized the man, who was walking slowly and as though absorbed in painful meditation. Strange to say, he thought that he recognized M. Leblanc. The hair was the same, also the profile, so far as the cap permitted a view of it, the mien identical, only more depressed. But why these working man's clothes? What was the meaning of this? What signified that disguise? Marius was greatly astonished. When he recovered himself, his first impulse was to follow the man. Who knows whether he did not hold at last the clue which he was seeking? In any case, he must see the man near at hand, and clear up the mystery. But the idea occurred to him too late, the man was no longer there. He had turned into some little side street, and Marius could not find him. This encounter occupied his mind for 3 days and then was effaced. After all, he said to himself, it was probably only a resemblance. Chapter 2. Treasure Trove. Marius had not left the Gorbeau house. He paid no attention to anyone there. At that epoch, to tell the truth, there were no other inhabitants in the house, except himself and those Jondrets whose rent he had once paid, without, moreover, ever having spoken to either father, mother, or daughters. The other lodgers had moved away or had died, or had been turned out in default of payment. One day during that winter, the sun had shown itself a little in the afternoon. But it was the 2d of February. That ancient Candlemas day whose treacherous sun, the precursor of a 6 weeks' cold spell, inspired Matthew Lanesburg with these 2 lines, which have with justice remained classic. Chu il Louise ou chu il Louise ern. Lors renter dans en sa caverne. 26. Marius had just emerged from his. Night was falling. It was the hour for his dinner. For he had been obliged to take to dining again, alas! Oh, infirmities of ideal passions! He had just crossed his threshold, where Ma'am Bougon was sweeping at the moment, as she uttered this memorable monologue. What is there that is cheap now? Everything is dear. There is nothing in the world that is cheap except trouble. You can get that for nothing, the trouble of the world. Marius slowly ascended the boulevard towards the barrier, in order to reach the Rue Saint-Jacques. He was walking along with drooping head. All at once, he felt someone elbow him in the dusk. He wheeled round, and saw 2 young girls clad in rags, the one tall and slim, the other a little shorter, who were passing rapidly, all out of breath, in terror, and with the appearance of fleeing. They had been coming to meet him, had not seen him, and had jostled him as they passed. Through the twilight, Marius could distinguish their livid faces, their wild heads, their dishevelled hair, their hideous bonnets, their ragged petticoats, and their bare feet. They were talking as they ran. The taller said in a very low voice, "The bobbies have come. They came near nabbing me at the half-circle." The other answered, "I saw them. I bolted, bolted, bolted." Through this repulsive slang, Marius understood that gendarmes or the police had come near apprehending these 2 children, and that the latter had escaped. They plunged among the trees of the boulevard behind him, and there created, for a few minutes, in the gloom, a sort of vague white spot, then disappeared. Marius had halted for a moment. He was about to pursue his way, when his eye lighted on a little greyish package lying on the ground at his feet. He stooped and picked it up. It was a sort of envelope which appeared to contain papers. "Good," he said to himself, "those unhappy girls dropped it." He retraced his steps, he called, he did not find them. He reflected that they must already be far away, put the package in his pocket, and went off to dine. On the way, he saw in an alley of the Rue Mouffetard, a child's coffin, covered with a black cloth resting on 3 chairs, and illuminated by a candle. The 2 girls of the twilight recurred to his mind. Poor mothers! He thought. There is one thing sadder than to see one's children die. It is to see them leading an evil life. Then those shadows which had varied his melancholy vanished from his thoughts, and he fell back once more into his habitual preoccupations. He fell to thinking once more of his 6 months of love and happiness in the open air and the broad daylight, beneath the beautiful trees of Luxembourg. "How gloomy my life has become!" he said to himself. "Young girls are always appearing to me, only formerly they were angels and now they are ghouls." Chapter 3. Quadrifrons. That evening, as he was undressing preparatory to going to bed, his hand came in contact, in the pocket of his coat, with the packet which he had picked up on the boulevard. He had forgotten it. He thought that it would be well to open it, and that this package might possibly contain the address of the young girls, if it really belonged to them, and, in any case, the information necessary to a restitution to the person who had lost it. He opened the envelope. It was not sealed and contained 4 letters, also unsealed. They bore addresses. All 4 exhaled a horrible odor of tobacco. The first was addressed to Madame la Marquise de Groucheray, the place opposite the Chamber of Deputies, No. Marius said to himself, that he should probably find in it the information which he sought, and that, moreover, the letter being open, it was probable that it could be read without impropriety. It was conceived as follows. Madame la Marquise. The virtue of clemency and piety is that which most closely unites society. Turn your Christian spirit and cast a look of compassion on this unfortunate Spanish victim of loyalty and attachment to the sacred cause of legitimacy, who has given with his blood, consecrated his fortune, ever youthing, to defend that cause, and today finds himself in the greatest misery. He doubts not that your honorable person will grant succor to preserve an existence extremely painful for a military man of education and honor full of wounds. Counts in advance on the humanity which animates you and on the interest which Madame la Marquise bears to a nation so unfortunate. Their prayer will not be in vain, and their gratitude will preserve their charming souvenir. My respectful sentiments, with which I have the honor to be, Madame Don Alvarez, Spanish captain of cavalry, a royalist who has taken refuge in France, who finds himself on travels for his country, and the resources are lacking him to continue his travels. No address was joined to the signature. Marius hoped to find the address in the second letter, whose superscription read: Ah Madame, Madame la Comtesse de Montvernet, Rue Cassette, No. 9. This is what Marius read in it. Madame la Comtesse. It is an unhappy mother of a family of 6 children, the last of which is only 8 months old. I sick since my last confinement, abandoned by my husband 5 months ago, having no resources in the world, the most frightful indigence. In the hope of Madame la Comtesse, she has the honor to be, Madame, with profound respect, Mistress Balizard. Marius turned to the third letter, which was a petition like the preceding. He read: Monsieur Bourgeois, Elector, Wholesale Stocking Merchant, Rue Saint-Denis on the corner of the Rue Auxiliary Fers. I permit myself to address you this letter to beg you to grant me the prettiest favour of your sympathies and to interest yourself in a man of letters who has just sent a drama to the Théâtre Français. The subject is historical, and the action takes place in Auvergne in the time of the Empire. The style, I think, is natural, laconic, and may have some merit. There are couplets to be sung in 4 places. The comic, the serious, the unexpected, are mingled in a variety of characters, and a tinge of romanticism lightly spread through all the intrigue which proceeds mysteriously, and ends, after striking alterations, in the midst of many beautiful strokes of brilliant scenes. My principal object is to satisfy the desire which progressively animates the man of our century. That is to say, the fashion, that capricious and bizarre weather vane which changes at almost every new wind. In spite of these qualities I have reason to fear that jealousy, the egotism of privileged authors, may obtain my exclusion from the theatre, for I am not ignorant of the mortifications with which newcomers are treated. Monsieur Bourgeois. Your just reputation as an enlightened protector of men of letters emboldens me to send you my daughter, who will explain our indigant situation to you, lacking bread and fire in this winter season. When I say to you that I beg you to accept the dedication of my drama, which I desire to make to you and of all those that I shall make, is to prove to you how great is my ambition to have the honor of sheltering myself under your protection, and of adorning my writings with your name. If you deign to honor me with the most modest offering, I shall immediately occupy myself in making a piece of verse to pay you my tribute of gratitude, which I shall endeavor to render this piece as perfect as possible, will be sent to you before it is inserted at the beginning of the drama and delivered on the stage. To Monsieur and Madame Bourgeois, my most respectful compliments. Genflot, man of letters. P.S. Even if it is only 40 sous. Excuse me for sending my daughter and not presenting myself, but sad motives connected with the toilet do not permit me, alas, to go out. Finally, Marius opened the 4th letter. The address ran: To the benevolent gentleman of the Church of Saint Jacques du Haut-Pas. It contained the following lines: Benevolent man, if you deign to accompany my daughter, you will behold a miserable calamity, and I will show you my certificates. At the aspect of these writings your generous soul will be moved with a sentiment of obvious benevolence, for true philosophers always feel lively emotions. Admit, compassionate man, that it is necessary to suffer the most cruel need, and that it is very painful, for the sake of obtaining a little relief, to get oneself attested by the authorities as though one were not free to suffer and to die of inanition while waiting to have our misery relieved. Destinies are very fatal for several and too prodigal or too protecting for others. I await your presence or your offering, if you deign to make one, and I beseech you to accept the respectful sentiments with which I have the honor to be truly magnanimous man, your very humble and very obedient servant, P. Fabantu, dramatic artist. After perusing these 4 letters, Marius did not find himself much further advanced than before. In the first place, not one of the signers gave his address. Then, they seemed to come from 4 different individuals, Don Alvarez, Mistress Balizard, the poet Genflot, and dramatic artist Fabantu. But the singular thing about these letters was, that all 4 were written by the same hand. What conclusion was to be drawn from this, except that they all come from the same person? Moreover, and this rendered the conjecture all the more probable, the coarse and yellow paper was the same in all 4. The odor of tobacco was the same. And, although an attempt had been made to vary the style, the same orthographical faults were reproduced with the greatest tranquillity, and the man of letters Genflot was no more exempt from them than the Spanish captain. It was waste of trouble to try to solve this petty mystery. Had it not been a chance find, it would have borne the air of a mystification. Marius was too melancholy to take even a chance pleasantry well, and to lend himself to a game which the pavement of the street seemed desirous of playing with him. It seemed to him that he was playing the part of the blind man in Blind Man's Buff between the 4 letters, and that they were making sport of him. Nothing, however, indicated that these letters belonged to the 2 young girls whom Marius had met on the boulevard. After all, they were evidently papers of no value. Marius replaced them in their envelope, flung the whole into a corner and went to bed. About 7 o'clock in the morning, he had just risen and breakfasted, and was trying to settle down to work, when there came a soft knock at his door. As he owned nothing, he never locked his door, unless occasionally, though very rarely, when he was engaged in some pressing work. Even when absent he left his key in the lock. "You will be robbed," said Ma'am Bougon. "Of what?" said Marius. The truth is, however, that he had, one day, been robbed of an old pair of boots, to the great triumph of Ma'am Bougon. There came a second knock, as gentle as the first. "Come in," said Marius. The door opened. "What do you want, Ma'am Bougon?" asked Marius, without raising his eyes from the books and manuscripts on his table. A voice which did not belong to Ma'am Bougon replied. "Excuse me, sir." It was a dull, broken, hoarse, strangled voice, the voice of an old man, roughened with brandy and liquor. Marius turned round hastily, and beheld a young girl.